There was a brief moment of tranquility after I finished, before all manner of hell and chaos broke loose. Other crew members were screaming and yelping, some almost clawing over their crewmates to get away from me, unsure if I would explode or worse. The medical safety officer on duty had been sitting at the cafeteria mess table with us and had already pulled up their incident log, frantically trying to dial in a contact for a medical emergency. I tried to wave them down as my overwhelmed universal translator finally started picking up some of the snippets of what they were saying, catching the words, somehow got the pressure wrong, and suspected possible personalized explosive decompression imminent. It was my damn allergies, as my eyes were still watering as I pulled the napkin away from my face, saying, No, really, I'm okay. Unfortunately, my stuffy nose had meant that it came up more as a garbled set of moans that the others told me the universe translator was terrifyingly unable to translate. Added to that were the large, ponderous strands of snot leading from my nose to the napkin. For anyone unfamiliar with human physiology, which was as a rule every alien present at the table, it looked like I had just flinched, convulsed, screamed, and expelled part of my cranial organ into my hands. This resulted in the second round of screams, yelps, and oaths to various gods and deities, as several crewmates were sure they were about to see a good friend perish in front of them as their brain dribbled into their hands. While it certainly sometimes felt like I was blowing a chunk in my brain out with these damn allergies, I quickly cycled through as many of the languages I could to reassure them that I was actually fine and then nothing was the matter. Still, I was regarded with a bit of suspicion, and I knew that quite a few were likely wondering if I was trying to pull some other fast one on them. Word had gotten out from the cargo bay loading crew about my having conned them out of a pretty good chunk of our wages this cycle, by reassuring them that I couldn't possibly lie while playing Cripjack, some manner of card game involving four-dimensional cards and an impressive amount of bluffing. I simply told them that humans' ears turn red when they lie, and it wasn't until I had fully doubled my earnings for that cycle from my winnings that they began to catch on that perhaps I lied about that too. I felt slightly bad because their species was naturally fairly trusting of others, but not too bad because they had been the initial ones to make fun of my gangly bipedal stance when I had first joined a few months back. So far, my work has been pretty isolated in the engineering bay. A lot of squeezing into tight spaces since I was no bigger than most of the other species' offspring. I fit into the various catwalks and access hatches more appropriately suited to the species that had designed the ship, a sort of iridescent, non-venomous scorpion that was roughly 5 feet long at their tallest point. It did mean that the repairs had an annoying tendency to assume you had additional limb or two more than I was able to offer, so half of my kit were simply grippers, levers, and wrenches, with extended handles so I could manipulate 4 to 5 gauges at once while trying to balance and tune the engine output. It was challenging work, well paid for even before I was able to win the additional gambling prizes. However, it also resulted in the situation like this, as the crew had barely any exposure to me except in passing. They were all friendly enough, even the ones that had reputations amongst other species or even within their own species for being disagreeable. But I definitely would give credence to what some human scholars and ambassadors have suggested, with humanity having a knack for making friends no matter where they go. Unfortunately, I was now abruptly left with the job of reassuring these friends that they were not about to see me violently decompress in front of their eyes. "Is that a normal biological function?" one of them asked nervously. I shrugged. "Not exactly. It's more like a learned behavior, but it's analogous to something called the sneeze." "What's a sneeze?" I could feel my allergies kicking up again. Something about one of the dishes one of my coworkers was eating must have had proteins in it, remarkably similar to cat dander, and I could feel it tickling the edge of my nose. Rather than resist it, I gave in to the urge as I said, "It's a chew." It was like another gunshot had been fired into the crowded hall. Those that had initially scrambled abruptly jerked again to give me several feet of clearance, while others held up tray tables or napkins and hands at defensive position so as to avoid getting human viscera splattered upon them, or so they must have guessed. "So that's normal for humans?" one of them asked incredulously. I nodded and said, "Yeah, pretty normal. We tend to try to cover it up because sometimes it can spray saliva and mucus." I had sneezed into my elbow, but a droplet of spit had escaped to smear against the table. Multiple sets of eyes were locked on me as I carefully wiped it off with my napkin. "Saliva?" said one. "My translator is not coming up with the direct translation for the word. It's just simply saying it's an internal fluid." "What exactly does it do? Does it mean you're hurt if an internal fluid is leaking out?" "Oh," I said. "Well, we secrete on it as a liquid, mostly water, and it's also got some mild acidity and digestive enzymes in it." Almost as one, with an unspoken agreement, all the aliens nearby abruptly scooched their chairs about half a step backwards, eyes locked on the table as if they expected the enzymes to begin chewing through the plastic compound and possibly onto the floor below. The enzymes are mostly there to break up hydrocarbon and protein bonds. "That's most of what we eat anyways," I said, gesturing to my plate. It was color-coded, a silvery sheen to the hydrocarbon puck, while the protein bar was actually a unique shade of pink to help signify this was something that was safe for my species to eat. It turns out quite a few other species were not able to deal with amino acids with any sort of cysteine bonds, and so trying to eat my particular blend of nutritional proteins would gum up their insides something fierce. A few of the others around the table had similar hydrocarbon pucks, and one or two had protein bars of different hues typically tailored to their own species' digestive capabilities. Still, those nearby hadn't relaxed as I had hoped yet, and one of them pointed at my face saying, "Human, I think your organ is still falling off," they said haltingly, and I couldn't tell whether that was due to either difficulty with the universal translator in parsing their language or concerns they might appear rude or forward. I chuckled, wiping my nose on the back of my sleeve instinctively before realizing my mistake too late, as there were visible sounds and motions of revulsion and disgust, as I seemingly nonchalantly smeared my primary neurological organ on my stained and oil-spotted jumpsuit. Eyes widening, I quickly raised my hands defensively. No, that's not my brain," I said firmly, and there was some degree of relaxation, but quite a bit of lingering suspicion. "What in the stars is that then?" piped up one. "It's viscous. Do you use that to build nests?" they asked, feathers fluffing slightly. I shook my head again. "No, it's another secreted solution called mucus. Our body uses it to protect thin membrane areas and to capture viruses and bacteria to prevent bodily infection." Several of the assembled aliens began nodding approvingly. Many species had some sort of similar biological process to prevent infection, and it was a required part of multi-species integration and cooperation to be at least passingly aware of the risks offered by alien pathogens. "So this compound then neutralizes and destroys the infection?" a small fuzzy green creature asked. "Oh no," I said. "Actually, typically, it's most slowly back into our digestive system to be destroyed in our stomach." There was a moment of hesitation and shock at those words, and the same alien spoke up again. A quaver in their voice, they said, "Wait, so you're saying you eat both the immobilizing compound and the infectious bacteria?" "Of course," I replied cheerfully. "Our stomach acid is—" There was a newfound wave of revulsion, although this time many of the aliens with weaker constitutions had already left the table, excusing themselves to go be sick elsewhere. "It's actually quite effective," I said, still feeling the need to defend my species in the face of a bunch of alien who were now quite sure the humanity was some sort of perverse biological joke. "It turns out that our stomach acid is quite acidic and capable of destroying most organic compounds handily." The aliens looked from me to the spot on the table where my saliva landed, and then back to me. "It's more acidic than that," I said, noticing their gaze. "It's almost pure hydrochloric acid." Eyes widened around the table, and I heard one of them mutter something my translator translated from their own choice of swear words to something analogous to "oh bullshit" in English. "No, that's true. We produce it in our stomachs and use that to digest proteins and hydrocarbons for nutrition." "In a stomach made of more digestible meat?" asked one of the aliens. "Well, yeah," I said. "We just produce a lot of mucus to protect the meats." The tallest of the assembled aliens leaned forward and hunched down, saying, "So is the human body basically just a bunch of meat to perform certain functions, and mucus to perform everything else?" I raised my finger and opened my mouth to argue against that, but then considered carefully and put the finger back down, saying, "Yeah, I suppose it is." The medical safety officer, who had braved their own disgusted abhorrence with each new factoid, leaned forward suspiciously. That acid remains within humans at all times, correct? It'd be a hell of a hazard log if it ever left your body, as acids anywhere outside of very controlled situations in the medchem laboratory would require an extensive write-up. I can say that it's definitely not supposed to come out, I said, carefully avoiding mentioning the possibility of vomiting, as I worried about what that might mean for my autonomy aboard the ship. The last thing I needed was to be watched like a hawk by the medical safety officer on the off chance I puked on duty. One of the other aliens who had been quiet up to this point leaned forward too and said, "So what else do humans make other than liquid waste, solid waste, and more little humans?" "Let's see. There's earwax, sweat, tears, and I think that's about it on the outside." "And what are those?" The alien who had asked the question leaned slightly forward in their chair, saying, "The translator is telling me that 2 of those are water-based, and the other is untranslatable. Care to explain?" Well, I was starting to feel nervous under the scrutiny, but decided the truth was the best answer going forward, especially since I couldn't think of anything worrying about the remaining substances. Sweat is a water-based salty solution that we exude through our skin. It's used for cooling in warm environments through evaporation. At this there was, for the first time, a chorus of approvals and a general impressed murmur. Heat regulation was something that several species struggled with, often requiring suits equipped with fans and humidifiers to keep safe in warm environments. It was one of the strong suits I had on board in the engineering section especially, as I was perfectly at home working on a toasty engine core without any concern, other than just making sure I stayed hydrated. "And what about this wax?" "Oh, it performs a similar function to the mucus, but it's less adhesive and has more structural cohesion," I said. By way of demonstration, I stuck my pinky in my ear and pulled out a small scraping of it before displaying it for those around to see. This was actually much more similar to the excretions of a lot of other species, and so there was another round of nods of approval, especially after I clarified that humans did not in fact eat earwax. "And lastly, tears," I said. "There's some discussion on what those are used for, and the research is still ongoing. But current signs point to it being a way of handling neurotransmitter overloads within our brain." There were a few tilted heads, not understanding, but glad I wasn't talking about pathogens and explosive expulsions as I continued. The human brain works with a series of chemical hormones transmitted between organs in the body and between neurons in the brain. In the event there's a saturation of those due to strong emotion or other circumstances, it appears the human body automatically vents these in the form of tears, another water and salt compound excreted from around the human eye ducts on the human eyes, I said, pointing toward my tear ducts. This is also met with a round of strong approval and impressed voices, some of them verging on envious. A common position on ships was a therapist or counselor, as many species lack the ability to quickly and easily recover from strong emotional states, instead remaining in them for hours or even days at a time in the most extreme examples. We still use other methods of healthy coping with long-term extreme stress and emotion, but it certainly helps sometimes to have a good cry about it. "Wow," said the most curious of the aliens. "There's some gross bits, but the human body is rather amazing." "Yeah, it really..." I felt a sudden drop of fear in the base of my guts. One of the others noticed, a coworker from engineering who must have picked up on human social and speech cues and patterns, enough to notice the slight pause. "What's wrong?" they asked with concern. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing at all. I'm just going to go as I need to get clean up and prepped for my work shift," I said nervously, abruptly realizing that the pink protein bar had some white speckled chunks in it I hadn't noticed when I first began consuming it. I groaned, realizing that the meal fabricator specialist on duty may not have realized they were 2 options for human protein bars, and unfortunately had given me the one that included cheese, or at least a cheese-like substance. I could feel my guts rumble ominously as the alien who had remarked upon the human body continued to say, "I do have one question though. I remember reading at one point that humans make something else as well, but didn't hear you mention it." The other aliens who had begun to walk away, presuming the conversation to be over, paused and soon clustered back around me, much to my mounting horror. looking me innocently in the eyes as I could feel the pressure building inexorably within me. The alien asked with an innocent tone, in their best approximation of a human smile, "What's a fart? I presume you know why you're here." The captain stared sternly at me. Next to them was the health and safety officer, in a fresh jumpsuit as they had changed out of the outfit they had ruined with an inky defensive spray of revulsion and surprise. "I've reviewed your statement," the captain said, "and I agree that the base cause lies with the cafeteria personnel. They've been instructed about the importance of paying attention to specific dietary restrictions for humans. And seeing as you were the only human aboard, I've also made the executive decision for them to simply remove the other style of protein bar from the fabricator menu." Embarrassed and tired, I nodded, saying, "Thank you, I appreciate it. But in the meantime," they turned back to me, "I have an entire sick bay full of nauseated and incapacitated crew members. You didn't just affect those nearby, you chemically assaulted the entire mess hall." The captain preened behind one of their ventral spines, a mannerism I had come to find out was associated with frustration. "We're on a very tight budget for oxygen and atmosphere recycling," they said. "And yet now, because of your actions, I had to seal and vent the mess hall into space to purge it thoroughly enough that your stench was eliminated." There was a pause as I hung my head. "All in all, it's an experience I certainly do not want to have happen again. Dismissed." As the door sealed behind me, the captain turned to the medical safety officer, muttering in an exasperated tone, "If I ever agree to have another human on board a ship under my command, I want it be on the record that I've gone insane and to be committed to the appropriate recovery facilities immediately. There are humans who do good work, but they're absolutely revolting."